Hello everyone and welcome to The Red Path. My name is Dara, and in today's video we're going to be talking about how the new Warhammer Balance Dataslate has affected the competitive landscape for all Warhammer players, including the World Eaters. If you're thinking about revisiting your collection in the wake of this Balance Dataslate and how to make it competitive, then this is the video for you. So let's grab ourselves a brew and get into it. The Warhammer 40,000 Balance Dataslate has just dropped, and it's massively changed how players perceive the competitive environment of the game. We've seen core rule changes, paring down of top factions, and elevation of struggling armies. No matter what army you play, it's a very interesting time to be part of the competitive environment. Here on the Red Path, we specialize in World Eaters, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. This video is primarily for competitively focused players, and will be a real deep dive into how these changes affect World Eaters on a micro and macro scale. Some of the concepts will be a little bit advanced, but if you're hungry for an in-depth review, this video is for you. If you want to be part of the discussion, of course, you can join our free Discord. We also have a Patreon and YouTube membership, which gives you access to focus channels within that Discord for competitive player hobby improvement, if that's your jam. The links are all down below, so check them out. But there is a lot to consider. With this Balanced Dataslate, we have received a big point reduction for the World Eaters, and core aspects of the game have also changed. We need to analyze these and understand how they interact, which may not be obvious upon our first reading. I might not catch everything in this video, so if you think there's something important that I've missed, do let me know down below. But I am going to cover the main changes that have happened and how they affect World Eaters. I'm also going to present some list archetypes, which I think will be really competitively viable options going forward. So let's kick things off with how the points have changed. The World Eaters have seen significant point reductions across almost their entire index. This is in line with many other combat-based armies which had been struggling in an edition that had so far largely been favouring gunline-based armies. Now, I don't think this is going to even things out between the two archetypes, but along with some other changes, it goes a decent amount of way into levelling the playing field. Broadly speaking, most combat armies have seen a 10 to 20% points drop, which will equate to 1 to 2 extra units being added into their roster. It might not seem like much, but it is also important to consider the net gain in points over other armies in the game, especially those which had caused us trouble so far. Many of the overperforming factions have seen drastic point increases, and in the case of armies like Eldar, the net gain between our decreases and their increases can come out at almost 500 points, which is a pretty significant difference. For World Eaters specifically, some of our competitively viable units have seen their points decrease, which has innately improved their value. This broadly applies across the entire army, thus making the entire force more competitive. There are a few units which stand out amongst this roster as particularly viable, and I am going to really focus on these, notably Khorne, Juggernaut Lords, Berserkers, and maybe as a surprise to some, the Exalted 8-Bound. Khorne, first of all, is a highly competitive choice for HQ slots. Some would say he vies for position in a list against the Master of Executions, whose points have remained the same, but he is still an excellent unit. However, I believe that Khorne and the Master of Executions can coexist within one roster, since they both fulfill slightly different roles. Even before these changes, I had brought Khorne to several tournaments and seen great success with him, and I know others had experienced the same. At his new price point, I believe a lot of people are going to try him out and discover he is really efficient. Specifically, he amplifies a 10-man squad of Berserkers, increasing their damage output thanks to his built-in reroll abilities and his own offensive profile. He makes a squad of Berserkers hit like a freight train, and if you use the blood dice to get sustained hits up, you will get a fantastic return from this unit. Furthermore, you should look to Khorne and his unit as a target for the +1 to wound strat versus monsters, vehicles and characters. This makes them a powerhouse into light vehicles or character units. And as a final tech piece, I really like using Khorne and his squad as a strategic reserve threat, emerging onto the board typically in turn 3, maybe via an ingress. This means you don't need to buy them a protective rhino, and they can strategically position themselves to shore up a flank or achieve objectives. Look to this unit for a mere 280 points as being a staple in a competitive World Eaters list going forward. Juggernaut Lords next have seen a points drop down to 100 points per model. This puts them in a really interesting niche as a character which is surprisingly resilient with decent damage output and good speed, making them a jack of all trades unit in the Khorne Trinity concept. A lot of people will default to asking the question, but what unit should he attach to? But personally, I think he is viable as a threat by himself, which can bully weak units, achieve tactical objective cards by doing actions, and overall be a real nuisance, requiring dedicated resource to remove him and taking the heat off some other units. If you like to boogie in the midboard and play the chess piece trading game, this is a unit to really examine in depth. He is a potential candidate for enhancements such as the glaive or helm, but remember his value is in his cheapness, so don't splash out unless you have the points to spare. I don't see him showing up in every single list, but as a character which before every game you can choose to attach to a unit or not, I think he has a lot of flexibility. And if your army already has 8-bound or Zerks, take a look at this guy as a possible tech piece to add in. Then, the hot topic, Berserkers at 100 points for a unit of 5. This is a considerable points drop, and it actually validates a variety of archetypes which were previously somewhat uncompetitive. Berserkers essentially transition from a unit which requires careful babysitting and correct application to one which is more disposable. It opens up the concept of the Berserker Horde list as being actually viable. Given that almost every list contains some level of Berserkers, it means that most players are going to be seeing a drop in their rosters. Additionally, their favourite taxi, the Rhino, has also seen a points drop, which helps out too. Attached character Berserker bricks now become really attractive prospects, sitting at the 280 point mark for the two most common builds with Master of Executions or Khorne. It also makes a Juglord attached to the squad particularly interesting, though personally I do favour him as a lone rider. Going forward, I think we will see a minimum of 25 Berserkers in most competitive World Leaders lists, probably organised into 2 squads of 10 and 1 of 5. In the absence of a higher potential for damage from this squad, the low cost feels pretty good, and I'm excited to see people get more mileage out of them again. Finally, as a bit of an out there pick, I'd like to talk about the Exalted 8-bound. This unit saw a hefty points drop, sitting at 150 points for 3 or 300 points for 6. I know a lot of people still regard this as being very expensive, and I do understand that sentiment. However, I think people are viewing them through the lens of damage potential only. A 3-man unit for 150 points, in my mind, has incredible value as a toolbox. Our army already plays the tactical mission really well, but I found we lack a unit to go deep and disrupt the enemy home base, often relying on brawling in the mid to secure points. 3 Exalted 8-bound can now step into that role at this cheaper cost. Ingressing them in just became safer, since both Titanic and out of line of sight units cannot shoot them upon arrival, provided you ingress behind a wall, and their extreme speed makes them really good at jumping out to where they need to be following arrival via ingress. Furthermore, it's very difficult to screen out 3 40mm bases. Obviously their damage output is still very average, but I don't think you're bringing them for that. In my eyes, this is a unit that can easily score you behind enemy lines and capture enemy outposts, among a variety of other cards. They're very versatile, and I'm very excited to try them out in some lists. I've already given them a go and had pretty good success with them. There's a lot of other really good discounts in the index, but it would take way too long to go through everything. These are my personal favourites, though I know people have been eyeing up the Lord of Skulls and Maulerfiend, amongst others. I'm excited that build versatility has opened up a little, and I want to hear about your ideas as well, so let me know down below or in the Discord if you agree or disagree with these as the best units. I'm going to move on though to talk a little bit about how the broader meta has changed and how that might affect World Leaders. The overall meta of the competitive game is going to shift considerably in the next few months. We've seen armies like Custodes and Imperial Knights gutted, while other armies like Necrons and Tau waiting in the shadows are now going to surge to the fore. Even Death Guard are poised to spread their contagions across a battlefield near you. But is any of this enough to topple the Eldar menace? And how are World Leaders going to survive in this new environment? Well, let's speedrun all the changes here and talk about the most important ones now. One of the biggest bullies for World Leader players was Custodes, and they've seen a massive nerf. Their units are capped to 5-man squads now, meaning no more golden bricks of doom led by captains in Trajan. Furthermore, their fight first stratagem can now no longer be doubled up or free, meaning they lose a lot of agency, specifically in our matchup. To cap it off, they've also seen a big points hike. This means that Custodes players will have to drastically reevaluate the organization of their army and its play pattern, and have a much worse time playing into World Eaters, since we can now leverage the fight first advantage with Masters of Executions and have a much better time charging into them. We also likely have an additional trade unit thanks to our points drops, and they've probably lost one, meaning that overall we have redundancy and surety in this matchup. I actually wouldn't be surprised if the win percentage figures invert from where they were before the slate, since this matchup heavily favours World Eaters now, and I think it is one of the most meaningful changes for us. Moving to Imperial Knights, another army that has seen widespread nerfs. Changes to towering, stratagem costs, overwatch, and core army rules means that the Knight matchup, World Eaters have gained a lot of agency. The game now becomes one of positioning around terrain, similar to how it was in 9th edition. While we still lack meaningful units outside of Angron who can take down a big knight, our point reductions means it's possible to simply volume them off the board now, or outscore them. The Knight matchup, similar to Custodes, should now become very winnable for World Eaters. Eldar, on the other hand, are likely still to be a very dominant army. Despite some nerfs, I think Eldar will remain in a very powerful position, though their win rate may be nudged downwards. My opinion is that most good Eldar players will pivot to the lists with other attractive options, like jet bike spam, and will still be very difficult for us to play into. However, there is more of a game there now, and I think player skill is going to start to matter. If a World Eater general outclasses an Eldar general, I think they're much more likely to take the game, but it's still going to be a really big uphill battle, by no means an easy win. Emerging meta armies like Necrons, Tau, and Orcs will be particularly challenging to us for a variety of different reasons, but I think one of these armies, which may surprise people as being exceptionally difficult for World Eaters in particular, is the Death Guard. They can outtrade us in the combat game and barrage us off the board with out of line of sight shooting, which is unnerfed. Their point reductions and army rule alterations significantly shake up the faction and position it to challenge the higher echelons of competitive play. Their mono combat Plague Marine spam builds are terrifying for World Eaters, as difficult as Custodes used to be, if not more so. Look out for this army, it's definitely going to take a lot of us by surprise and be a seriously tough matchup to get through. There is of course a lot of other moving parts to the meta, and I imagine there's going to be significant changes and shifts as people explore new concepts. I can't cover it all, I definitely can't even predict a fraction of it, but I think in general we are well positioned within to cause havoc. I am going to shift focus now to talk about World Eater list archetypes and emerging concepts that I've found interesting. For this section of the video, I'm going to break down some interesting emerging archetypes for the World Eaters. For this, I reached out to our competitive focused Discord channel, which Patreons have access to, and asked them what were the emerging concepts that they found particularly interesting and viable. I've combined this with some of my own thoughts, what I'm going to be bringing to the London Grand Tournament in a couple of weeks' time, and presented it for you here. Now, I think the sandbox has really opened up in a very, very interesting way for the World Eaters, and I'm very excited that it's not just Angron lists that appear to be viable. So let's take a look at what I'm going to be bringing to the London Grand Tournament first. So, from my point of view, while new options have opened up to World Eater players, the fact that Angron did not go up in points makes builds which center around him even more competitively viable. Angron-based lists often lacked staying power before the data slate, feeling like they were missing one key unit to keep them in the fight. Now, that unit probably exists in most lists. I've refined the list that I brought to the Warhammer World Golden Ticket event in August, because it dropped by 165 points. What we have now is what I would consider to be the core template for World Eater lists, and something which I think is going to be very common going forward. It starts with Angron, Khorne, Invocatus, and 2 Masters of Executions, one of which has the Berserker Glaive and one with Favourite of Khorne. This is a hefty amount of HQs, meaning assassination is a viable option for my opponent, but I'm fine with that. There's a lot of power tied up in these units, with each fulfilling a different role and being vital to the function of the army. Battle line units include 2 10-man Berserker squads and a 5-man, and 2 10-man Jackal squads. The 10-man Berserker squads will attach with Khorne and the Berserker Glaive, while the 5-man will take the Favourite of Khorne Master of Executions and act as a defensive buffer. The two 10-man units are your hammers in this list, with Khorne normally playing from strat reserve and ingressing in. The Jackals do honest work around objectives and get busy scoring mission cards. This and the HQ choices are what I'm going to coin the World Eater's standard template construct for the next few months. I think tons of lists are going to begin with this exact loadout and alternate the remaining points around. I might be wrong, but I think the selection of units here offers you many tools to play the game, terrifying hammer units in the form of Khorne, Angron and the Berserker Glaive, and options for speed and repositioning with Invocatus. Then we have a Rhino for trucking around the Berserker Glaive squad. While useful for this, it's also a nice tool to use for Rhino drifting and to absorb fight first units, scoring mission cards and being a nuisance. Following on, we have some meaty choices. One 3-man squad of 8-band and two 3-man squads of Exalted 8-band. I've already highlighted why I love the Exalted 8-band now, and they think they're a prime target for Invocatus' scout move. If you've decided that you just want to alpha strike your opponent hard, you can push 5 units into their face in turn 1 quite easily with the right Blood Tide buffs up. The Deep Strike is probably more useful than the upper tables for the Exalted 8-band and using them for disruption and chaos scoring. The regular 8-band, I think they're an interesting unit which can be used in this list as an early game trade piece which presents an annoying, fast threat that needs to be cleaned up. The whole thing, it's a classic for me, a Ronseal list which has hidden toolbox of tricks and maneuvers that can change depending on my opponent. I really like playing simple lists like this which have many reactionary tools and multiple waves of high level threat, and it embodies the list. The play pattern is fun, it's interesting. That said, I don't think it's going to be uncommon to see almost this exact list on tables, and bias aside, I think it's probably the strongest archetype we have available. Now it's time to check out the Patreon lists. So I've picked my favorite from this list. Apologies to anyone that I didn't get covered. I wasn't able to do them all, but these are the ones that I think stand out the most from my own list and also have competitive legs. First up, we have a list from Graduate, and this is a heavy skew list which would make Jack proud. It's Angron, a Lord of Skulls, a Desecrator allied in, and some padding in the form of two 5-man Berserkers with Khorne and the Glavemo, two 10-man Jackals, and two spawn units. This list is an archetype which is becoming surprisingly popular for World Eater players. Big boy time. The triple threat of the Desecrator, Kalos, and Angron make for a difficult time with target priority, especially if Graduate goes first. The scoring of this list will be tied up largely in the infantry, who busy themselves around the feet of these monsters, and a canny opponent will focus on lifting them ASAP and then dealing with the big threats. I think it has legs though, and will shock a lot of people at its aggressiveness, which, if you can't deal with it quickly enough, will put you in the ground. I think the archetype of 3 to 4 big threats is an emerging one for us, but one we will see a lot more of, especially going forward after the Balance Dataslate. This next list comes from Westy 2024, and I really like it. The HQ layout will feel familiar. Khorne, Invocatus, two Masters of Executions, but we have a Juggerlord instead of Angron. Following on from that, we have 4 Berserker squads, 2 5s and 2 10s, and a Jackal squad. Then there's a squad of 8-band, a Defiler, a Predator Destructor, a Hellbrute, and a Forge Fiend. It's a really cool take for a non-Angron list, and I think on the surface it reads as a bad list, but actually just has such a wide toolbox of units which all do different things and fulfill a variety of roles. The list has tons of units that can do actions, and its ability to trade is phenomenal. As Westy said in Discord, the Defiler is almost always slept on, but will kick the door in of so many units, even knights. And I think the list rides on the opponent initially thinking it's bad, and then swiftly realizing that they don't know how to take it apart because frankly it's so weird and wonderful. Our next archetype goes very heavy on armor and strips away useless meatbags. It's from Scott G, and those of you who enjoy your big demon engines will like this one. It starts with Angron, Khorne, and the Berserker Glavemo, and a demon prince on foot with the brazen helm. Khorne and the Glavemo have a 5-man squad each to accompany them, and then there's 10 Jackals for scoring. Then we have a Mauler Fiend, a Forge Fiend, and 2 Brigands. This brings a high amount of tough, durable platforms to the table, and a really considerable backline gunline from which Scott can put down some heinous firepower. Angron and the Mauler can take the heat off the guns, or vice versa. Meanwhile, there's some infantry rushing around playing the objectives. My only concern is that it leans almost too hard into the archetype and may struggle at playing the tactical objectives. However, essentially gaining a demon engine thanks to the point drops really helps this archetype function. The last list archetype comes from Snake Whips, and I just had to cover it since it had Terminators, and I know half of our viewer base is obsessed with them. We have Invocatus, Khorne, and 2 Masters of Executions, one with the Berserker Glaive. A lovely spread of 2 10-man and 2 5-man Berserkers supplement 10 Jackals. There is a single Rhino, 3 Exalted 8-band, 10 Terminators, a Brigand, and a Huntsman. Invocatus here offsets the Terminator slowness by yeeting them up in turn 1 and positioning a very durable mid-brick to be a massive problem for the enemy, while lots of auxiliary units can function without worrying about the central objective. The 5-man Berserkers I really like here as a simple trade, and the 3 Exalted 8-band are just so lovely for those Chaos and Havoc backfield points. The icing on the cake, of course, is the 2 War Dogs with that tougher profile and good firepower support. As a non-Angron list, it has good teeth, probably one of the more competitive ones I've seen. I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to all the lists that were presented in our Patreon Competitive Focus channel. There were some really good ideas, but I wanted to present a variety of ideas and things which differed from my own concept. I'm looking forward to seeing them all put into practice though, and they present different play patterns, so there's probably one there that suits you as the viewer. Of course you can be part of the conversation too, links are all down below, but let's start summarizing and closing out this video for now. The war leaders have seen a significant improvement in this Balance Dataslate in a world where the most offending armies in the game have been taken down a notch. The whole meta is going to be in Chaos for a while, and let's face it, Chaos is where world leaders do best. Once again, we have plenty of viable options, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say our army is probably now high B tier once more. I wouldn't be surprised to see our win rate push the 50% mark, or to see GT podiums coming in on a semi-regular basis. We'll probably also see an uptake of new players and returning players, which is always exciting as it brings new innovation. If you're one of those players, welcome or welcome back. We are delighted to have you, and as the meta unfolds, we'll have lots of discussions, ideas, and breakdowns. If you've enjoyed the video, be sure to drop us a like, drop us a subscribe. Any support goes a really long way, and all the links are down below if you want to go further. Most importantly though, join the Discord and be part of the wonderful conversation that we're having every single day about all these changes and loads of other good stuff. So until the next one folks, I've been Dara and you've been watching The Red Path. Thank you so much for tuning in this far, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay healthy, stay safe, and kill, maim, burn.